The sunrise over Oahu on December 7, 1941, was perfectly clear and perfectly empty. The carrier strike force, 6,000 miles west, had already turned north. Admiral Yamamoto's final transmission. Cancel. No bombs, no burning battleships, no declaration of war. Just the wind across a Pacific morning that would never make it into any history book. Because the history books were about to be written by someone else. Japan's oil reserves had 18 months left. The American embargo was a tightening fist. So the Imperial Navy went south, through the Dutch East Indies, British Malaya, the soft underbelly of Southeast Asia. By March 1942, Japan controlled the world's richest oil fields, the rubber plantations of Sumatra, the tin mines of Thailand, and the United States did nothing. Not because Roosevelt lacked the will, because Congress lacked the votes. Gallup polls from October 1941 sat on every senator's desk. 83% of Americans opposed war with Japan, even if it attacked Thailand. Without a burning harbor, without 1,000 corpses at Pearl, that number held. FDR could rage, he could expand Lend-Lease, move the Pacific Fleet to Hawaii as a show of force, but he could not cross the line. America was a fortress with its gates locked from the inside. In Manila, MacArthur watched the Japanese roll through the Philippines with helpless fury. The planes he'd begged for were still in crates on San Francisco's docks. The reinforcements still training in California. The Philippines fell without a single American division fired in anger. The tide turned red, not from a single shocking morning, but the slow, choking spread of imperial control across a continent. Then Europe began to unravel. Stalin had counted on Vladivostok. Through that icy port came trucks, aviation fuel, tungsten that kept Soviet factories running. With Japan dominant, the sea routes became too risky. Lend-Lease to the Soviet Union was cut by 40% overnight. The German army, stalled in the mud before Moscow in December 1941, pressed forward in spring. Without American Studebaker trucks, Soviet supply lines collapsed. Without aviation fuel, the Red Air Force flew fewer sorties. The Wehrmacht took Moscow in July 1942. Churchill received the news in the cabinet war rooms, a cigar burning to ash. He had managed catastrophe after catastrophe, but this was different. The Eastern Front collapsing, the Nazi Empire stretching from the English Channel to the Urals, and still the Americans would not come. He sent desperate telegrams to Roosevelt. The president read them aloud in a voice cracking with frustration. But the Congress that refused to fight Japan was not about to fight Germany. Hitler, sensing the shift, never declared war on the United States. Why provoke the sleeping giant when it was already staying asleep? By 1943, the world had divided into three spheres. The Japanese co-prosperity sphere stretched from the Solomons to the Himalayas, from Borneo's oil fields to coastal China's puppet states. Chiang Kai-shek's nationalists, starved of supplies, collapsed in 1944. Japan installed a collaborationist government in Nanjing, turning China into a resource colony. Europe, from the Atlantic to the Soviet interior, flew swastikas. Only Britain remained unoccupied, a fortified island running on American credits and Canadian wheat, a lighthouse in a dark sea. And across the Atlantic, the United States sat in sullen peace, rich and untouched, building warships it never launched, training soldiers it never deployed, growing factories that produced for a war that never came. The economy boomed, isolationism was vindicated. The newspapers called it the American century. But the scientists knew. In Los Alamos, Oppenheimer kept working. The Manhattan Project hadn't been cancelled, just slowed. Without the urgency of an active war, the research moved at a peacetime pace. By 1947, they had a working device. By 1948, the first nuclear weapon was not dropped on Hiroshima. It was detonated in the Nevada desert, a demonstration for a world that had never seen a man-made sun. The footage played in every capital. Tokyo received it with silence, Berlin with contempt, London with desperate hope. The bomb changed everything, and nothing. The three spheres stared across the broken lines of the old world, each holding a gun they could not fire without destroying themselves. No D-Day, no Iwo Jima, no Nuremberg trials. The 20th century did not end in a clean victory of democracy over tyranny. It ended in a stalemate, grey and cold, with three empires daring each other to pull the trigger first. The Cold War was a game of three, played on a board where Europe was silent, Asia enslaved, and America the richest, most frightened nation on Earth. In 1953, a boy was born in a Japanese-occupied Philippine village. He grew up speaking Japanese in school, Tagalog at home, and English in whispers. He never heard of Pearl Harbor. The ships never burned. The war never came. He was called Andres after no one in particular, a name that survived the Spanish, the Americans, and now the Japanese. The village sat in the shadow of a mountain whose name changed 3 times in his grandfather's lifetime. Rice terraces climbed the slopes like ancient staircases. The water running through them had run before any flag flew over Luzon. Japanese soldiers came once a week, counted heads, checked papers, took a portion of the harvest, and left behind a silence that lasted until their trucks' dust settled. Andres learned early to be invisible. He crouched in irrigation ditches when soldiers grew impatient. He memorized the shadows that meant an officer was coming. He watched his mother fold the American flag from her own childhood into a square no bigger than her palm and hide it beneath the loose floorboard by the stove. She never spoke of it. The nights were hardest. The stars were the same his father had pointed out before the war that never was a war, only a long, quiet occupation. His father had been taken to work on a road through the mountains. Word came back in fragments like a radio signal scrambled by static. Andres did not know if his father was alive or dead, only that the east wind carried no news. He thought often of America, the country he had never seen, the country his history books described as a sleeping giant. But the giant had not woken. In the village, America was a myth whispered by old men who remembered Americans walking through with chocolate bars and cigarettes, a memory fading each year. The Americans left nothing but the flag under the floorboard and a language slowly erased from classrooms. One evening when Andres was 10, a man came who spoke English with an accent that was not Japanese. He was dark-skinned, thin, wearing clothes mended many times. He said he was from Mindanao, where the resistance still moved through the jungles. He said there were radios in the hills picking up broadcasts from Australia, Britain, a place called the United States. He said the war was not over, only paused. He looked at Andres with eyes holding a light the boy had never seen. "The Americans are building something," the man said, low and urgent. "Something that will crack the world open." Andres did not understand, but he remembered the silence that followed, broken only by water running through the terraces, endless and patient, the same water that had run before any of this began and would run long after. On clear nights, when the wind carried the smell of the sea, he would look east toward an ocean that separated him from a country that had once been the hope of the world. If you want to see more stories about the roads not taken, the choices that shaped our world, and the ones that might have shattered it, consider subscribing. These alternate histories exist in the